And Lear was now king of an empty castle. He still strode about regally. He still wore his fine linens and his furs and his crown. He still stood underneath the painted sky. But now only the stars could hear him say anything. And a king with no one to talk to, no one to rule, doesn't really feel like a king. So he decided it was time to go visiting. And he chose his eldest daughter first, Goneril. He'd go and see her. So he called together his retinue of 100 knights, 100 of them, and told them they would all be going to Goneril's house and to make ready. So the knights packed meat and wine, and they saddled their horses and dressed them in the most colourful livery of the royal house at the king's instruction. And they got together their flags and their standards, and when they were all arrayed outside the palace the next morning, just before the dawn broke, they looked like a drunken carnival of colour. It was like a moving pageant going towards Goneril's house. And Lear sat astride the biggest, mightiest of the horses. And he looked out at the dawn horizon in front of him. And the sun had barely dusted it with gold. And he found his mind began to wander just a little. He was tired. And his mind wandered to Cordelia. And he wondered where she might be. And at that moment, an unseasonable breeze skittered round his horse, biting at his ankles, winding up towards his knees, and he shivered and pulled his cloak around him tighter. And then a voice came, a voice he didn't recognise. It sang its way in on the breeze and blew in his ear. And it said, "Lear, Lear, you are a foolish, fond old man." "No," thought Lear, "I am a king." "I am a king," he said out loud. But his knights didn't hear him, because the wind snatched his words and pulled them heavenward. And so Lear kicked his horse on, and the pageant made its progress towards Goneril's house, which was many, many miles across the heath. And much, much later that day, Goneril was in the library of this great tower house that rose from the heath, and she was supervising the hanging of a massive map of her new lands that she'd had commissioned specially for that room. And as she was doing it, a servant came in and informed her that her father and a retinue had been seen approaching across the heath. And her heart sank, and she thought, "Oh, crikey, that's all I need. Well, I'd better go down and greet him. He's the king, after all. Well, he's my father, at least." So she went downstairs, trudged her way down the winding stone steps to the main entrance hall of her tower house.